Hello, I'd like to take a time to welcome everybody to another episode of The Watchmen. We are March 6th, 2022. A couple of dudes sitting on the wall just observing what's going on in today's world. This time, I'd like to introduce Checkmate and myself, Paul Lear. How's it going? How are we doing
Hey,
this evening?
it's going well, my good man. Hopefully the captain of the guard ain't asleep.
I hope not. And don't want to lose our clothes.
That's right.
We got a good shot here in the Middle East. Holy cow, there's a lot going on. We got a lot of territory to cover. Obviously, we got events happening in Ukraine. We got Iranian nuclear deals. We got the Prime Minister of Israel, and that's where we're going to start. Well, no, we're not going to start there. This was breaking news. You had sent this out at ValorTube. And this is starting to take place in Ukraine, and I'll let you handle this and just your observations with this issue in regards to Ezekiel 38.
Yeah, this is I made that cute comment because I've been really trying to get people who are really exploring Ezekiel 38 and 39 to take a good look at my page, because that is these days how I follow events, even though I follow events professionally that are askance of that. And this was sent to me just a couple of hours ago by a guy who's been fighting in the Middle East for a while, and he just sent me a copy of the push notification. And I said, it makes absolute sense in the push notification. But the first thing I thought was, here you have now the Russians taking the Syrians into an out-of-area fight. And so they're capitalizing on what they learned in Syria, and they're bringing in people who they think are the experts to advise their troops, regardless of how one thinks about the direction of things in Russia and Ukraine. And we will most assuredly be getting into that. I just thought this was fascinating. It's just a further cementing of the relationship.
Absolutely. And, we were talking about this beforehand. I think this is a topic. We're going to introduce this topic like we did this evening. And I think in the coming, gee whiz, I would say weeks, but as quickly as this is developing, it may be sooner. We're going to be talking about this more. And it's going to be moved south into Syria at some point, or who knows, may have some.
I think so. I think that's the real, to me, I think that's the real push at the beginning of the operations between Ukraine and Russia. Their naval forces gathered off of the Syrian coast, and the bulk of their actual forces were there as a blocking force against NATO, and so they mean business in the Eastern Mediterranean.
Absolutely. Now we'll transition from there to this story. And I can tell you, nowhere in my reading of Ezekiel 38, 39, none of my calculus had Israeli Prime Minister Bennett. This is from allisrael.com. I'll just read the headline. Israeli Prime Minister Bennett secretly flew to Moscow today, becomes first known world leader to meet with Putin since war began. And the crazy thing to me is we have an Israeli prime minister who's an Orthodox Jew. And you can see he's got his yarmulke, he has the head covering, he has the prayer shawl, he has the phylacteries, he has the trappings of an Orthodox Jew, and he takes the time to do this on Shabbat, or the Sabbath on Saturday. And I'm just like, there's so many things that hit me with this too. And it's like, number one, as an Orthodox Jew, that man has had to have read Ezekiel 38, 39. He has to have an understanding that at some point, according to the scriptures, that Gog of Magog, now whether you take that to be Russia, which I'm in that camp, or whether you take that to be Turkey, somebody's going to coalesce, a group of countries, Russia, Turkey, modern day Iran, Libya, Sudan, arguably maybe Ethiopia, and some other countries, and is going to lead an invasion, or on the doorstep of an invasion, into Israel. That man has to have read that. And so I am blown away from that standpoint, that he wanted to inject himself into a peace process as a negotiator. So, there's that piece of it. And then he chose to do it on the Sabbath. And the thing that blows me away, again, as an Orthodox Jew, and I'm sure he consulted some rabbis for some exceptions, and I've read some of that stuff where they think, well, an exception would be the sparing of human life. But the thing that came to my mind is there's only one Lord of the Sabbath, and that's Jesus Christ. And he got in a lot of trouble for doing things on the Sabbath. So, I mean, from that standpoint, he's kind of made an exception. I'm not saying he's the Antichrist. That's not the point of this. But he has injected himself as bypassing the law. I mean, and the Sabbath was even before the law. That was during the creation week. So, I mean, that's a pretty big step for an Orthodox Jew to do this on the Sabbath. And as I understand it, wasted no time. As soon as the sun came up, he was on a plane and he was off and going. So, and at that point, I know you had some thoughts about this as well, from a geopolitical and a spiritual standpoint, and I'll give you the floor on that and go right ahead.
Yeah, thank you. One of the things that I believe in the whole context of the book of Ezekiel that gets missed when people study 38 and 39 is that my understanding of Israeli culture, I have many Israeli friends, I've done business with Israeli diplomats in my previous life. Um, Israelis are frequently not of one mind on certain things, and this government came to power by being of one mind on two things, and that is Bibi Netanyahu had to go, and that Iran was bad. That's it. Other than that, they are such a mishmash. And part of the problem, as I have noticed, and some of my more conservative Jewish friends agree with the observation, is that there is a huge element in Israeli politics, particularly the senior security establishment and Ministry of Foreign Affairs, that are post-religious. They wear the trappings, they go to the ceremonies, they do what it is that would be expected of a good Jew, but in point of fact, it doesn't govern the way they execute business. They very much owe their thinking to modern academia in the United States, or more of a modern European manner of thinking. So highly transactional and again, post-faithful. And so one of the things about the book of Ezekiel, especially 39, is that it's God saying, I will be the one person I will be the one entity who my people will turn to when this moment of duress occurs. And I think, Paul, it's how many, in terms of the Levitical calendar, how many years is it now that they've been regathered in Israel?
Yeah, they've been there. This is, I think, the 73rd year, which,
Okay.
so there are so many things that are fascinating about that, because you look at Psalms, I believe it's Psalm 90, talks about the age of a man, 80 if you're strong. That, and then anything in and above 80, you're very strong. What Israel, figuratively as a man, is approaching that. And then you start looking at sabbatical sets of 7. Well, we're crossing some interesting time relationships, 73 to 80, 7 years and so forth. But that kind of speaks to that piece of it that you're talking about right there. And I'll give that back to you.
Sure. And so my experience with the Israeli security services, which was very spare, and I want to keep it that way, but in my reading and in my understandings and in my interactions, the one thing I've discovered, particularly about the Mossad, is that they're just full of bastards. You want nothing to do with them. Even, some of their own appointed leadership from time to time has just said, I hate these people. And that's a bit glib, but you look at, for example, people like Ghislaine Maxwell and Jeffrey Epstein. That was a Mossad sexual entrapment operation against the United States and other countries as well, of course. But that's what that was, and that is very much the way they look at something that you can do. And I think that some of the excesses that have been engaged in on the secular Israeli view of security, some of the excesses that they've engaged in go greatly against what their faith is supposed to be. And I look at chapter 39 as being the culminating point of the entire book of Ezekiel, being the waywardness of those who call themselves Jews but do not practice it. And so starting at chapter 6, I will send fire on Magog and on those who dwell securely in the coastlands, and they will know that I am the Lord. So I will make my holy name known among my people Israel, and will no longer allow it to be profaned. And I bluntly think that what you're seeing in Israeli society through this coalition government is it is generally post faithful. It beat out somebody who I think Netanyahu really won. I think they had a mini scandal there, but the culminating point is all the nations will know God's fury. Then the nations will know that I am the Lord, the Holy One in Israel. So at once he will take the issue of being post faithful off the table and reassert himself while showing the world these are my first covenant people. So that is where I was trying to set the biblical context for why it is the Israelis seem to do some things that are highly secularized and seem a bit desperate, like what Bennett did, running contrary to his religion. Because in my belief, he was really there because we're extremely close on the Iran deal.
Very good. And from that, we'll jump back to Ezekiel 38. And and this speaks to the gang is clearly together. Again, Gog, Meshech, Tubal, Turkey, Magog, modern day Russia, Persia, Iran, Cush, Sudan, Ethiopia, Put, Libya, Beth Dagarm, again another ancient name for Turkey, and the many nations with you. And that's one thing I really appreciate in getting the opportunity to visit with you. I've looked past the many nations with you, and there will be others. I mean, so you look at all those lands between the Caucasus. I'll pull that up on a map again. You start looking at Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, then you look at some of the old Stan republics from the old Soviet Union, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, Tajikistan, Kyrgyzstan, Kazakhstan, and then don't forget Belarus over here. Moldova was an old Soviet republic. I mean, so some of these folks are going to all coalesce together at some point and come south into the Middle East. And if you don't think that's happening, I mean, look no further than here we are at the Iran UN charade that's taken place in Vienna with these negotiations over the nuclear deal. And it's becoming pretty clear who all's working together, and that's where I'll turn it over to you as far as who's working together in this deal and what's it about to mean to us.
This negotiation, as far as I am concerned, I've written this on Fighting Checkmates. This negotiation is the United States and Russia negotiating head-to-head with Iran being told to play its part. This is Russia's attempt to insert itself as the leading power, the leading external power in the Middle East, and Iran is their entry point to do that. Meanwhile, you have the United States backing away, and the Abraham Accords, generally speaking, the urgency behind concluding them was the Iran threat. Now, as the United States is backing away, Israel and the Abraham Accord co-signees are really looking at themselves saying, what do we do now? And so the final piece in the negotiation, the final piece that was unanswered, at least in terms of an internal U.S. political picture, is what assurances do we have that the nuclear peace is enforceable? And it wasn't even enforceable when the IAEA was able to do its job. But here we have the Director General of the International Atomic Energy Agency going to the Iranians, and he's saying, for all intents and purposes, I encourage people to read the piece, but for all intents and purposes, he's saying, okay, we have the assurances we need that we can fix this and we can successfully monitor. There will not be any nuclear threat emanating from Iran. And this is the last piece that the negotiators need to be able to turn around to their bosses and saying, we have all the assurances we need that we can let this deal go forth.
There you go. And so, and if you don't believe that, then, then I found this today, and this is from Polaris at Twitter. It says, shocking video. This is the lead Russian negotiator for the Iran nuclear talks, Mikhail Ulyanov. And he spends about a minute and a half. It's edited, but he's bragging about how Russia, Iran, and China have teamed up to deliver huge wins for Iran's nuclear program in the Vienna negotiations. Now, the thing I didn't realize, and you'd brought this to my attention, and to this fellow here, Mr. Ulyanov, Russian diplomat, he knows the American diplomat involved in the negotiations. And, and at that point, this is your kind of wheelhouse with the things you know about, and I'll let you offer up your insights into this.
I'll very quickly say there's nothing a diplomat loves more than being able to toast champagne after doing a press availability, having signed something. But the fact is that even professional State Department officers resigning from a delegation like this is a mark against your career, but 3 people have done it, is how bad this deal is among the U.S. team. The U.S. team isn't even in the room with these 3. These 3, they work amongst each other, and then they turn around and come to the United States, who's in a separate room. They're nearby. They're in the same palace, but the Iranians won't meet face-to-face with us. And so that's the modality of the way this negotiation is going down, that these 3 work with each other, and then they come to the United States. And the United States delegation, from what I understand, is just turning back to the White House and saying what they said.
So it's really not even a face-to-face direct negotiation.
No, not with the Iranians. The Russians and the Chinese speak face-to-face with the United States, but the United States effectively is cut out of this. And I think, again, going back to the Bennett thing, the Israelis are not of one mind on this, but the Israelis who I keep in touch with, I wrote to them, I said, you're unofficially abandoned and you're on your own. And he wrote back, yeah, it feels that way.
Okay. Well, I'll tell you what, for those of you who want to listen to his comments, go to Twitter, Polaris NatSec, and pull up this video. Again, it's about 1.5 minutes of edited comments, and you might find it very, very interesting.
Very revealing. It was a good grab. It's very revealing.
Yeah. So, and if you don't think, for those of you who question whether or not Russia, Iran, if this prophecy, these countries coming together is not real, this is from RT. Now, this is Russian state-affiliated media. Twitter is there to protect us and let us know these things. This is Russian. This is what Russia wants out. And Iran's paramilitary group, Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, has unveiled what it described as the country's 2 new underground missile and drone bases. This is according to state TV, Iranian state TV. And so you have Russian media, state TV, reporting on what Iranian
recycling Russian propaganda.
That's right. So,
yeah, it's that again. I know we'll get into this, but that's my central objection to the incessant coverage of what's going on in Ukraine. It's like it's the battle of propaganda with Ukraine winning, but this is ridiculous. This is we're propagandizing other people's propaganda.
Yeah, and I thought your observation of this was, very good. Thank God they're wearing masks down there in the hole.
Yeah, it's not like that high Iranian technology won't explode or anything.
So,
is that a lefty loosey righty tighty poster on the wall?
Could be. So we will go from that to this is an article you had sent me, and to me, your point with this article sums up, as you see it, what's taken place geopolitically between Russia and Ukraine. And I'll turn this one over to you.
It really does. I got disgusted in the early hours of this conflict with just how little empirical truth was available. It truly was a battle of propaganda. It's so opaque what is going on the ground, and most likely the people who have the clearest picture among the U.S. players are probably people who are sitting in an operations center in Stuttgart watching real-time information coming back from intelligence assets as to what is really going on. I'm just so fed up with watching the entire thing, and I'll kick it back to you in a moment with the story we mentioned before going on. I'm looking at this entire thing, and the moment I knew the whole thing was turning into a sham, a fraud, an inside deal between moneyed Western interests, the White House, specifically the Clinton faction within the White House, and the Russians, and certain factions within Ukraine, is the moment that Bill Clinton announced that he was restarting the Clinton Global Initiative. I'm like, oh, here comes the ceasefire money grab right now. And that's actually already started, all the charities that are starting up right now. We need to pray for the people in Ukraine, because once the ceasefire happens, they're going to get fleeced, and they're going to need the help, and they're probably not going to see a dime of what's getting collected right now.
And that's the sad thing, is that there are real people suffering real problems, life, death, losing their homes, lives uprooted, and they're just being used for for power and money is the gist of it. And with that, we're going to pivot to money. And this is I believe this was on the 1st. This is from Just the News. This is another article you had sent me.
Yeah.
And Jerome Powell, he's the Federal Reserve Chairman. He acknowledges Russia's sanctions could rev China plan for alternative to dollar-centric banking system. And your point was, as I understand it, this is kind of a marking of the line in the sand. Hey, we need to remember this statement on this day. And the context of this is he's speaking in front of the Senate, and there is a debate going on as to whether or not the Federal Reserve is going to raise interest rates. And then and at that point, I'll turn that over to you in your observations on.
Yeah, and what happened within the ensuing 48 hours. Both Visa and MasterCard terminate operations in Russia. The Russians announced that they're going to go with work with the Chinese on an alternative banking system. And it was also something where he had suggested that there could be a secondary currency that would be a global reserve currency. And all I could think was, with the succession of events that shook out of that hearing, it may not be a conspiracy, but it ain't a coincidence either that boom, 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 these things went off one after another. And it brings me back to the point in the previous page that we were looking at, is that this thing has finesse in it, is that there are players out there who have more affinity for each other across borders than they do their own countrymen, and they're working together right now. And this and what is shaken out in the ensuing 48 hours is just proof of it. But this needs to be marked, because this man and his institution, they need to be held to account for what may happen to the U.S. economy as a result of them running their yap.
Absolutely. And we're going to get into that here in just a little bit. Also, in addition to MasterCard and Visa, I saw American Express pulled the plug on all Russian transactions as well. So there went another major financial institution from the United States, which, it's just going to push them, like you say. And then the end result of all this stuff is while we have these, conflicts taking place, we're about 4 to 6 weeks, maybe 8 weeks at the most, getting ready to start planting crops in that part of the world. Now, this is a big deal. And I think this article out of the Times of Israel sums it up. I mean, this is the breadbasket of Europe, North Africa, and the Arabian Peninsula. And you start looking at all the countries that get affected and rely on their grain, from Algeria all the way over here to the Arabian Peninsula. Europe is reliable on grains from Ukraine and Moscow. I mean, this is going to be, if they don't get these crops in within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we're going to have some real significant issues in regards to food supply chains. And I mean, that's not just grains for bread, animals, hogs, cattle got to eat grain. I mean, the cascading effect, the trickle down effect, if you will, that how this will affect all kinds of things will be enormous, from bread. I mean, that's what started the Arab Spring, in 2011. was over bread prices. I mean, this is the kind of stuff that leads to civil unrest in countries, and you start seeing changes in leadership. This is a big deal, and I also find it interesting. If you look at Revelation 6, verse 6, the commodities that are discussed that talk about hyperinflation, hyperinflation will be a hallmark of the onset of the tribulation. And we're trending in that direction. Is this the event that kicks it off? I don't know the answer to that. But we're trending in that direction. And you look what's affected in Scripture: wheat, barley, oil, and wine. I mean, we got 3 of the 4 of them being discussed in our headlines on a daily basis. And at that point, you have additional thoughts to that?
Not really. I think that's an excellent summation, especially when you consider that if Russia decides it's going to hang on to that southern tier of ports, they're going to take their cut for anything that needs to go out to sea, and most of it has to go out to sea across the Black Sea and through the Bosporus and the Dardanelles in order to make it to its locations. Yeah, there we go.
Here's Bosporus Straits right here through Turkey. We're going to talk about Turkey here in a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
And then the Dardanelles are down through here.
Mm-hmm. That's right. And so if the Russians hang on to those southern ports, which I think they really want to do, you can bet there's going to be a surcharge on that stuff as it departs.
Well, one of the things I was reading about too, and I listened to a variety of things on this over the weekend, and one thing that was happening is like some of this stuff's already wanting to go out for distribution. Orders have been placed, people have purchased things, but because it's coming from Russia, their backlash is we're just not going to take delivery on it. And so you got commodities just spoiling, sitting on ships, in response to the invasion of Ukraine. That's right.
And it's just because Russia is losing the propaganda war because they're Russians and they can't propagandize well. And they're losing that war, and they've become too hot to touch now.
Which, not going to spend a whole lot of time on this, but it sounds like there's been some sort of naval intervention, amphibious assault in and around Odessa. And that's probably going to be working its way up along the border here.
Yeah, and along that border on the other side of it is, at a certain distance, anywhere from 20 to 50 miles, is the Dniester River. And in that sliver of land between the Dniester River, if you stop right there, there's Tiraspol in the upper left corner. Yeah, that is the capital of a breakaway region. The Russians are already there with a lot of troops. They've been there since the fall of the Soviet Union. They refused to give it up, and I worked on the diplomatic mechanisms to try and get them out of there. So I think that these troops in Odessa might link up with the border of Moldova, because that region right there already has troops on it and an airfield. Which by the way, your tax dollars rebuilt. Just saying.
Okay, so you can see that, and that was the thing too. What was it? Lukashenko, the president of Belarus, he may have leaked that a little inadvertently. Mm-hmm. What their intentions were. Gotta love it. And then this is another big one. So we've talked about grains, and we've talked about the impact of food and people being able to eat. Well, Russia's main gas pipeline to Europe, they cut off supply. And so Europe was already out of gas. And now, well, let's just shut it off completely, because Putin doesn't like the fact that, I'm supposed to be able to just walk in there, do what I want, and you guys aren't supposed to have a response to it in NATO. Well, they do, and now he turns off the gas. And to me, this is the core issue of what's taken place and why it's taken place.
That's exactly it. And the sad part is that it's from Russia today. Is that the most matter-of-fact thing I think I've seen all week out of any of the press is this article right here, that this is what this war is about.
And this is coming from RT again. This is what they want you to hear. So pretty direct.
It's coming from a propaganda mouthpiece, and it's the most honest thing.
Yeah, and so the one place we've not talked a whole lot about is Turkey. Where does Turkey fit in all of this? I still think there is some big time headline event heading some point in the middle of this with Turkey. I got a chuckle out of this. Turkey reports 54% inflation 1 month after Erdogan fires his statistics chief. It's like, I didn't like the numbers. let's get rid of him. Well, things got worse. And now they're blaming it on the spillover effects from the Russia-Ukraine crisis, global prices, commodity prices, and supply chain disruptions. But one thing, and I've had some people reach out to me on social media. I'll mention his name, Mr. Duncan. Give him a shout out. He put out a very well reasoned, thoughtful response as to why he thinks that it will ultimately be Turkey and not necessarily Russia. Now my position as to why I think it's Russia is well documented. But one of the best arguments he makes about it, eventually it may be Turkey, a leader from Turkey may be Gog, is because 5 of the 7 places mentioned in this prophecy are what are modern day Turkey. So I'm open, and those would be, there are parts of Magog you could say belong to Turkey. Meshech, Tubal, definitely modern day Turkey. Gomer, part of modern day Turkey. And Togarmah, that's like Beth Togarmah, house of Togarmah, right down here. That's, they still refer to Turkey as the house of Togarmah in some parts of Turkey. So, I don't want to neglect the idea. I'm open to the idea that, Turkey, Gog may ultimately be the leader from what is modern day Turkey. I'm listening to that. And I'm just curious what your thoughts were on that particular.
It's interesting because as I was brainstorming what we would talk about, because it was getting so rich that an organized presentation from scratch, I was like, well, we'll just let the headlines read and go with it. But I need to reread the word. I reread this very same thing. That thought had crossed my mind as well. So, you can pass my regards back to the gentleman who wrote that and tell him great minds think alike, or fools seldom differ. He can take his pick. And and the fact of the matter is that I got that feeling as well, because the context of Gog is that they get pulled into it. It's like they have no choice but to do it. And it could be that they're the titular leaders, but they being the Russians, they get pulled into it because of some foolish thing that the Turks would do. Which is very much Erdogan. He's done a lot of really dumb things ever since he's been selected as president. So I'm really open to that as well. I think the Russians are worth paying attention to just because they have much more throw weight. They're the leading external power where the Middle East is concerned, or at least that's their aspiration. We still are, but I think with this Iran deal, we're beginning to forfeit it. So I can see the Turks attempting to take the lead and the Russians getting pulled in, if for no other reason than proximity alone, their hand in Syrian politics.
And I'll throw this in too as well. I mean, it is a reality that of the 7 churches in the book of Revelation, they are all in modern day Turkey. So Turkey is going to play a role in this at some point. And I think at some point, something big will happen between Russia and Turkey and Iran. I mean, what that looks like, how it happens, I think economics are going to play a role into it, just because of the chart we looked at just a few seconds ago. I mean, they got 54% inflation, 1 month, compared to the year over year. I mean, that is a crazy amount of inflation that's going to affect people. They're going to have a say in this at some point, and that will dovetail to, let's look at some futures markets on how this has already playing out just from the weekend's events. The futures are down anywhere from 1.5% to 2%, with the S&P, NASDAQ, and Russell small caps. Crude oil is already up to $125 a barrel. You can see it's up another $8.50. I suspect that's going to continue to go higher. Looks like gold has touched $2,000. And the thing that is really crazy when you start looking at spreads, cost of natural gas. So here in the United States, at the wholesale level, we're paying $5.06 at the wholesale level for a unit of natural gas. Now, all the natural gas is taking place in for sale. Is it the Dutch natural gas? And look at that. That's up as high as 160 compared to 5 in the States. I mean, so this is crazy. And then Russia turns off the spigot this weekend. I expect this to pop and go way higher. They're already out of gas. They don't have any gas left. It's cold over there.
This is meant to be a punch in the gut of Western businessmen. Putin is no fool. He knows that if the heads of major corporations go into their governments and say, look, you tell that numbskull Zelensky that he's got to sue for peace, he knows what he's doing.
And I mean, so we're talking what, from 5 to as high as 1, even at 110, we're talking 20 to 25 times, and it's going to go higher. That spread's going to continue to increase.
Yeah.
And, so you can see a scenario. It is not hyperbole or fear porn when you start looking at Revelation 6 and you start looking at a global event, a global economy where there's hyperinflation, where it's going to cost a day's wage to eat. I mean, you get into the countries across North Africa, onto the Arabian Peninsula, where a lot of this stuff is subsidized just for bread. And what does it take to make bread? Barley or wheat. And then you need some oil to just make things run. You can see real quick how that scenario could spiral out of control. And then you have a globe that has got supply crunches on fuel and food. And, the longer this goes, the worse it's going to get. It's just that straightforward. So, do you have, Checkmate, you got any closing comments on any observations from the past week?
Not really. I'm going to withhold encouraging people to go to the fighting, Checkmates, but if you do, we'll take you. But that's about it. I think we've covered the waterfront. I'm not sure what we've covered it with, but yeah.
Well, again, this is another episode of the Watchmen. We're just a couple of dudes sitting on the wall making some observations. So appreciate you guys taking the time. I'm sure we'll be talking to you again. You guys have a great night. Thanks, Checkmate. Appreciate it.
God bless.
All right, y'all take care. Bye.